It was a cold, rainy evening in Los Angeles. The streets glistened under the dim light of street lamps, and most people hurried home, shielding themselves from the drizzle. But inside a quiet corner diner on Sunset Boulevard, one man sat calmly by the window, Seagal. Wearing a simple black jacket and his usual calm expression, Stephen had just finished a long day of martial arts training. He sipped his tea slowly, lost in thought. Outside, thunder rumbled, and that's when he noticed something. A small figure crouched beside a trash bin across the street. A boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, barefoot, drenched, and trembling. He was digging through garbage bags, desperately searching for something to eat. Stephen's eyes softened. He set down his cup, stood up, and walked out into the rain without hesitation. When he approached, the boy flinched, ready to run. "Hey," Stephen said gently, kneeling down. "You hungry?" The boy didn't answer and just stared, unsure whether to trust him. Stephen smiled softly and extended his hand. "Come on, let's get you some food." Moments later, they sat inside the warm diner. The waiter looked surprised to see Stephen soaked from head to toe, sitting with a shivering child. Without saying much, Stephen ordered 2 plates of hot soup and sandwiches. When the food arrived, the boy devoured it as if he hadn't eaten in days. Stephen just watched quietly, letting him eat in peace. After a while, the boy whispered, "Thank you, sir." "My name's Liam." Stephen nodded. "Nice to meet you, Liam. You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing. Never give up." Liam looked up, his eyes wide. "Even when it's hard?" "Especially when it's hard," Stephen replied with a faint smile. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. Stephen paid the bill, handed the boy his coat, and walked him to a nearby shelter. He didn't know it yet, but this small act of kindness would spark a bond that would last for years, and one day, change both their lives forever. Stephen had no idea that this one simple act would come back to him in a way he could never imagine. The next morning, sunlight crept through Stephen's window, but his mind was still on the boy from last night. He couldn't shake the image of that little kid, soaked, barefoot, trying to survive in a world that had forgotten him. Most people might have thought it was just another random act of charity, but for Stephen Seagal it wasn't. He had seen too much pain, too much struggle in his life to ignore someone who needed help. So that evening, he went back to the same diner. And there he was, Liam, sitting near the back alley, hugging his knees, trying to stay warm with a torn blanket. Stephen approached slowly, carrying a small paper bag. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "Did you eat today?" Liam looked up, surprised to see the same man again. "No, sir. Not yet." Stephen smiled and handed him the bag. "Well, now you have." Inside was a sandwich, a bottle of milk, and a chocolate bar. Liam's face lit up, not just because of the food, but because someone actually cared. From that day on, it became a routine. Every few nights, Stephen would swing by after training and bring Liam something to eat. Sometimes it was soup, sometimes leftover food from the dojo, sometimes just hot tea and bread. But every time he showed up, and without fail, he never made a big deal out of it. No cameras, no publicity, no one else knew. It was just between him and the boy. Weeks turned into months. Liam began to trust him, and their conversations grew deeper. One night, as they sat on the diner steps, Stephen asked quietly, "Where's your family, Liam?" The boy looked down, tracing lines on the ground with his finger. "My mom, she got sick, and after she died, my dad, he left. I tried to stay with some people, but they kicked me out." Stephen's jaw tightened. "How old are you?" 10, Liam said softly. Stephen nodded, staring out at the quiet street. "You're stronger than most grown men I know, kid." Liam tilted his head, confused. "Strong? Me?" "Yeah," Stephen said with a faint smile. "Because you're still standing." That night, Stephen went home thinking deeply. He couldn't change the world, but maybe, just maybe, he could change one person's world. From that moment, it became his mission. He spoke to a local shelter director and arranged for Liam to have a permanent place to stay. He bought him a few pairs of shoes, warm clothes, and a school bag. He didn't want Liam to depend on charity. He wanted him to learn to fight life back. And soon, Liam began to change. He started going to school again, shy but determined. Every week, Stephen would check on him, not as a celebrity, not as an actor, but as a father figure. Sometimes they'd meet at the dojo where Stephen trained. Liam loved watching the martial arts sessions. His eyes lit up every time he saw Stephen perform. One day he asked, "Will you teach me how to do that?" Stephen smiled. "You can't just learn to fight, Liam. You have to learn why you fight." The boy nodded seriously, repeating every word like a promise. Days turned into years. Every week, no matter how busy his schedule, Stephen found time to bring food and talk to Liam. Birthdays, holidays, late nights. He was always there. People in the neighborhood noticed the strange friendship between a world-famous martial artist and a homeless boy. But Stephen never explained. It wasn't about fame or image. It was about compassion. He once told a close friend, "Everyone sees the movies, the action, the fights. But what matters most is what you do when no one's watching." That's exactly what he lived by. And Liam? He began to grow not just in strength but in confidence. The scared little boy who once ate from trash bins now walked with purpose. His grades improved. His smile returned. It wasn't just food Stephen was giving him. He was giving him something far more valuable: hope. Each night as Stephen walked back home, he'd glance at the sky and whisper to himself, "Maybe this is what true purpose feels like." He didn't know that this simple act, feeding a hungry child, would soon come full circle in ways he could never predict. Because one day, that same little boy would grow up and do something that would leave the entire world speechless. Would you help a stranger if you saw them hungry? Tell us what you'd do and where you're watching from. Drop your country and city in the comments. Let's see how far this story is reaching. Years passed like pages in a silent book. The boy Stephen once found shivering in the rain was no longer the same. Liam had grown taller, stronger, and more confident. But what never changed was the humble gratitude in his eyes. Stephen had become more than a mentor to him. He was family. Every week, without fail, they met. Sometimes it was for dinner, sometimes for training at the dojo, sometimes just for a quiet conversation about life. Stephen wasn't just teaching him martial art. He was teaching him philosophy, balance, and self-respect. "Remember, Liam," Stephen often said, his deep voice calm but firm, "fighting is the last thing a real warrior wants. You fight only to protect, never to harm." Liam nodded each time, absorbing every word. He admired Stephen's strength, but even more, he admired his heart. At school, Liam began to change. The quiet, nervous boy who once avoided everyone was now standing up to bullies, not by fighting, but by speaking with confidence. Teachers noticed. His grades improved, and his kindness began inspiring others. Every now and then, Stephen would appear outside his school in his black jacket and sunglasses, pretending to be just another visitor. Liam would always smile when he saw him waiting by the car. "You came again," he'd say, grinning. Stephen smirked. "Of course I did. I promised, didn't I?" Their friendship deepened over the years. Stephen supported Liam's education, encouraged him to dream bigger, and taught him discipline. On weekends, Liam trained at Stephen's dojo. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he had something far more powerful: determination. Sometimes during breaks, they'd sit on the mat, drinking water, and Liam would ask questions about life. "Do you ever get tired of helping people, sir?" Stephen would chuckle. "Real strength doesn't come from the body, Liam. It comes from the will to do good, even when no one thanks you." Those words stayed with Liam. They shaped him, molded him, and soon, others began to notice that same quiet wisdom in the young man that Stephen carried himself with. When Liam turned 16, Stephen surprised him with a small celebration at the dojo. A handful of students, some local friends, and a simple cake. No cameras, no headlines, just laughter and gratitude. But the best gift wasn't the cake or the training. It was what Stephen told him that night. "Liam," he said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "life is going to test you. It'll push you down when you least expect it. But you've got to promise me, when that happens, you'll stand back up." Liam nodded, his eyes glistening. "I promise." That promise became his foundation. The years that followed were filled with challenges. Liam worked part-time jobs while studying. Some nights he went hungry again, but this time he never gave up. Because every time he felt hopeless, he remembered Stephen's words, especially when it's hard. By 18, Liam had earned a scholarship to a university out of state. When he told Stephen, the older man smiled proudly but quietly. "That's your victory, Liam, you earned it." Liam hugged him tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Stephen replied, "You just needed a little food and someone to believe in you." That night before leaving for college, Liam stood by the same diner where they'd first met. The rain was falling softly again, as if the world was repeating that old memory. He closed his eyes, remembering that first bowl of soup, that first act of kindness, and made a vow. One day I'll repay this. Somehow, some way. He didn't know how, but his heart knew it was a promise he intended to keep. Years went by. They stayed in touch through letters and calls, though less frequently as life got busier. Stephen kept training, working on his films and helping people quietly. Liam was growing, studying social work, volunteering at shelters and speaking at schools about resilience. He often told people, "The person who saved me didn't just feed me. He taught me how to feed others." The world still didn't know about their connection. There were no photos, no social media posts, just two souls tied together by kindness. But destiny had a way of circling back. Because one day soon, that same boy would appear again in Stephen's life. Not as a hungry child this time, but as a man ready to change lives on a much larger scale. And when that day came, it would be Stephen's turn to be speechless. Have you ever met someone who changed your life without asking for anything in return? Share your story below. You never know who might be inspired by it. Life moved on, quietly, steadily, almost too fast to notice. Liam's days were filled with books, deadlines, and the chaos of university life. Between studying social work and volunteering at shelters, he had little time left. But deep down, he carried Stephen's lessons like sacred armor. Every time he saw a struggling person on the street, he felt that familiar ache, the memory of his past self. And without hesitation, he'd buy them food, sit down beside them and talk. Not as charity, but as someone who truly understood. One night, while closing the shelter where he volunteered, an older man whispered to him, "You remind me of someone who listens without judging." Liam smiled softly. I learned that from the best. He hadn't spoken to Stephen in almost a year. Life had gotten busy, and Stephen's schedule as an actor and martial artist had also grown demanding. But that bond, though quiet, was never broken. Sometimes late at night, Liam would replay old voicemails. Stephen's deep, steady tone saying, "Keep going, kid. The world needs your light." That was enough to keep him pushing through. By the time Liam graduated, he was a different man. Polished, educated, confident, yet humble. He wore a simple suit to his graduation ceremony, not designer clothes, but his heart swelled with pride. As he stood on stage holding his diploma, he looked into the crowd, half expecting to see a tall man in sunglasses. But Stephen wasn't there. After the ceremony, Liam found an envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a handwritten note. "Proud of you, son. The best fights in life aren't won in the ring, but in the heart, Stephen." No fancy card, no signature flourishment, just those simple words. And yet they hit harder than any applause. Years went by. Liam built a reputation as a youth counselor, traveling to schools and communities to speak about homelessness and perseverance. His talks went viral online. Short clips of his speeches spread across social media. People admired his empathy, his wisdom, his calm voice that carried truth. Still, he never mentioned Stephen's name. That story was personal, sacred. Meanwhile, Stephen had aged gracefully but quietly. His hair was grayer, his movements slower, but his eyes still burned with strength. The dojo where he once trained Liam now stood half empty. Many of his students had moved on, chasing their own dreams. Some nights he'd sit by the window with a cup of tea, scrolling through news articles on his phone. He didn't care for fame anymore, but one headline caught his eye. "Young counselor inspires thousands after sharing journey from homelessness to hope." Stephen froze. The picture beneath the headline showed Liam, older now, standing before a crowd of children, smiling, confident, radiant. A slow smile crept across Stephen's face. "That's my boy," he whispered. For a moment he thought about calling, but something inside him said no and let him shine on his own. He didn't want to interrupt the journey. Then out of nowhere, tragedy struck. While traveling for a community outreach program, Liam's small van was hit by another car late at night. The accident wasn't fatal, but it left him with severe injuries and months of rehabilitation ahead. The news made local headlines, and though Liam tried to stay strong, his recovery was slow and painful. When Stephen heard about it, he didn't hesitate. He got on the first flight out. By the time he reached the hospital, visiting hours were nearly over. But Steven Seagal wasn't a man easily stopped by rules. The nurse froze when she saw him enter, tall, dressed in black, calm but commanding. He walked quietly into Liam's room. The young man lay there, bruised and bandaged, but still smiling faintly when he saw who it was. "Sir, you came." Steven pulled up a chair, his eyes heavy with emotion. "Of course I did. I told you, when life knocks you down." "Stand back up," Liam finished, tears forming. They both laughed softly. It was like time had folded in on itself. The years vanished, and all that remained was the bond between them. For the next few months, Steven stayed nearby, visiting regularly. Sometimes he'd bring food. Sometimes he'd just sit in silence, letting his presence speak for him. Liam slowly healed, not just physically, but emotionally too. During one of their walks in the hospital garden, Liam said something that made Steven stop. "You know, I've spent my whole life trying to repay you, but now I realize and I never can. You didn't just save me once, you kept saving me, every day." Steven smiled faintly. "You already repaid me, Liam. How?" "By becoming the man I always hoped you'd be." Those words hit Liam harder than any punch he'd ever taken. By the time he was discharged, they promised to stay close again. But neither of them knew. Destiny had one last life-changing surprise waiting around the corner. If someone once believed in you when no one else did, tag them below or write "thank you" in the comments. Gratitude can change lives. Months after Liam's recovery, life seemed peaceful again. Steven had returned to his quiet routine, morning tea, training at the dojo, helping local kids. But something inside him felt incomplete. He often thought about legacy. Not fame, not wealth, but what a man truly leaves behind when he's gone. He had trained thousands, acted in dozens of films, yet the only thing that truly mattered to him now was the difference he had made in one young boy's life. Then, one morning, Steven received a letter. The handwriting was familiar, bold, careful, and sincere. "Dear Steven, you once told me real strength means doing good even when no one notices. I want to live that lesson. I'm starting a foundation, one that feeds, shelters, and educates homeless children. I'm calling it the Seagal Hope Foundation. You taught me that one act of kindness can change everything. Now I want to pass that on. Liam." Steven read the letter twice, his hands trembling. He leaned back in his chair, eyes misting over. He had taught Liam discipline, kindness, humility, but this was beyond anything he expected. Weeks later, Steven was invited to the foundation's opening ceremony. When he arrived, hundreds of children were there, laughing, eating, playing. In the center stood Liam, addressing the crowd. Cameras flashed, news reporters whispered, but Steven didn't care. He was too busy watching the boy he once saved, now saving others. Liam spotted him from the stage. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment both men smiled, and no words, just understanding. The crowd erupted in applause as Liam said, "This is the man who changed my life, and now I want to do the same for others." The audience stood, clapping. Steven lowered his head humbly, hiding the emotion in his eyes. He didn't need credit or recognition. Seeing those children happy was enough. In that moment, Steven realized, sometimes the smallest act of kindness doesn't just change one life. It creates a ripple that changes the world. The Seagal Hope Foundation quickly became more than just a shelter. It became a movement. Within months, donations poured in, volunteers lined up, and hundreds of homeless children found food, safety, and education. Liam worked tirelessly, not for fame, but for purpose. Every morning, he greeted children at the center with the same warmth Steven had once shown him. He'd kneel down, smile, and say, "You matter. Don't ever forget that." The media began to take notice. News channels aired heartwarming segments about the young man who rose from the streets to build hope for others. But what truly captured the public's heart wasn't just Liam's story. It was the mystery man behind it. People kept asking, "Who is this Steven Seagal he keeps mentioning?" One evening, a journalist approached Steven's home for an interview. She expected the movie star, the martial arts icon, but found a quiet man tending to a small garden, wearing simple clothes and a calm smile. "Mr. Seagal," she asked gently, "how does it feel knowing your kindness inspired something so big?" Steven paused, resting his hands on the shovel. "Feels peaceful," he said simply. "I didn't do it to inspire anyone. "I just saw a hungry kid. Sometimes that's all it takes." The clip went viral overnight. People flooded social media with comments like, "That's what real heroes look like." He didn't just feed a boy, then he changed a generation. But for Stephen, none of it mattered. What mattered was watching Liam build something beautiful, something real. Weeks later, the foundation hosted a special anniversary event to celebrate helping over 10,000 children. Liam insisted that Stephen be the guest of honor. At first, Stephen refused. "It's your day," he said. But Liam smiled. "No, sir. It's our day." That evening, under a soft golden sunset, hundreds of children gathered in the courtyard of the foundation. Banners fluttered in the wind, each one reading, "One meal, one act, one miracle." When Stephen arrived, the children ran to him, laughing and hugging his legs. He looked around, overwhelmed. The same street where he'd once met a starving boy was now a place of hope and laughter. As the ceremony began, Liam took the stage. Cameras flashed, but he ignored them. His voice was steady, emotional. 10 years ago, I was just a boy sitting in the rain, wondering if anyone cared whether I lived or died. And then a man stopped. He didn't ask questions. He didn't judge. He just gave me food and dignity. He turned toward Stephen, his eyes full of tears. "That man taught me what real strength is. It's not about fame or money or power. It's about compassion." The crowd went silent. Many were already wiping their eyes. Then Liam gestured toward a curtain on the stage. "And today, I want to honor that man in a way words never could." The curtain dropped, revealing a bronze statue, a life-sized sculpture of Seagal kneeling down, offering food to a child. Beneath it, engraved in shining gold letters, were the words, "One act of kindness can feed 1,000 souls." The audience gasped. Stephen stood frozen, staring at the statue, at the memory immortalized in metal. Slowly, he walked to the stage, emotion visible in his usually calm face. He looked at Liam, then at the crowd. I don't deserve this," he said softly. "All I did was feed a hungry boy. He's the one who turned that meal into hope for thousands." The crowd applauded, but Stephen raised a hand. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that kindness doesn't need cameras. It doesn't need awards. It just needs to be passed on." He placed a hand on Liam's shoulder. "You've done that better than I ever could." Liam smiled through his tears. "You gave me 10 years of food, sir. I'll spend the rest of my life giving others the same." The crowd erupted in applause again, louder this time, genuine and emotional. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, Stephen looked out at the children laughing, eating, and playing, and for the first time in years, he felt something deeper than pride, peace. He realized that his greatest film wasn't one recorded on camera. It was this moment, unfolding quietly in real life. And as he stood beside Liam, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and gratitude, Stephen whispered to himself, This is what real victory looks like." If you believe one act of kindness can change the world, type hope in the comments. Let's see how many people still believe in compassion. Months after the Foundation's anniversary event, Stephen and Liam's story began spreading far beyond their small town. News outlets from around the world started covering it, not as a celebrity headline, but as a human story. Movie stars' act of kindness changes thousands of lives. The man who turned a meal into a movement. Within weeks, donations flooded in from across continents. Celebrities, athletes, and ordinary people alike joined hands to support the Seagal Hope Foundation. Schools started food drives in Stephen's name. Churches, mosques, and temples held charity events inspired by his story. And yet, Stephen stayed exactly the same. No interviews, no red carpets, no self-promotion. He often told Liam, "Fame fades, but kindness never does." As years passed, the foundation expanded into multiple countries, each one dedicated to helping underprivileged children and families. Liam managed operations with wisdom and humility, always keeping Stephen's philosophy alive. They often sat together on quiet evenings, watching the sun go down over the center they built. Children played in the distance, laughter echoing through the air. "Hard to believe this all started with a bowl of soup," Stephen said one evening, smiling softly. Liam chuckled. "Maybe, but that soup had more power than you realized." Stephen looked thoughtful. "No, Liam, it wasn't the food. It was faith. You believed you could become more, and you did. Their bond had grown deeper than words. They weren't just teacher and student anymore, they were family. Years later, when Stephen's health began to decline, he withdrew from public life completely. Liam visited him often, bringing fresh food, old photos, and stories from the foundation. Every time he entered, Stephen would smile faintly and say, "Still feeding the world, huh?" Liam always replied, "Just following your recipe." When Stephen peacefully passed away one quiet morning, the news broke hearts worldwide. The internet flooded with tributes, fans, friends, and people he had helped without ever meeting him. But the most touching moment came days later, during the memorial service at the foundation's courtyard. Hundreds of children, once homeless, now thriving, gathered to light candles. Each child held a small note that read, "Thank you for feeding me hope." Liam stepped to the microphone, his voice trembling. Stephen never wanted fame. He just wanted people to care. And that's what we'll keep doing. For him, for everyone still waiting for a second chance. He paused, looking up at the statue, Stephen offering food to a child, now surrounded by flowers, candles, and drawings made by kids from around the world. Some heroes wear uniforms, some wear capes, Liam continued. But the greatest ones just carry kindness in their hearts. The crowd stood in silence, tears glistening under the soft glow of the candles. A gentle wind blew through, almost as if the world itself was bowing in respect. From that day on, every meal served at the Seagal Hope Foundation carried a message printed on its plate. One act of kindness can feed the world. And years later, when new children came in, hungry, frightened, alone, Liam would sit with them just as Stephen once did. He'd hand them a warm plate of food and say, "You're safe now. Eat first. The world gets better after that." He never mentioned Stephen's fame. He didn't need to. The legacy lived on, in every bite, every smile, every act of compassion, because kindness doesn't die with the person who gives it. It multiplies, echoing through every life it touches. And so, what began as a single meal shared between a movie star and a hungry boy became a story that fed the entire world with hope. If this story touched your heart, type respect in the comments. And remember, no act of kindness is ever too small. You never know whose life it might change.